sort of chronologically through Emily Dickinson's life. So this is early period, the early map and her parents, a copy of the portrait of her and her siblings, and then it follows sort of through as she grows up.
One of the things I liked reading on your webpage about your collection, both about Emily and Robert Frost, is that you really try to encompass their whole lives. It's not just like, let's have a few poems or a few manuscripts. You really give their whole life and put them in context.
Yes, we do try, and I think one of the strengths of our collection is, it's not the biggest Emily Dickinson or Robert Frost collection, but it does provide the context for their lives, especially Emily Dickinson's life.
Good morning, I'm John Riley. I'm here on behalf of the Massachusetts Center for the Book and also for Northampton Community Television. We have an initiative to visit most of the public libraries in the Valley and see their special collections, see what sets them apart from all of the other libraries. As we know, New England is blessed with fabulous public libraries in all of its towns, cities, and villages. And we're going to try to see exactly what sets each library apart, their special collections, their special holdings. And today we're at the Jones Library, and we're meeting with Cyndi Harbeson, the curator of special collections. Cyndi, you're in charge of special collections. What other aspects of this library is it contained here where we are right now?
It's the special collections, archives, and then the fine art collection is all up here.
Do you do a lot with genealogy as well?
We do. We have a lot of genealogists coming.
Do you get a lot of people coming and asking about their family's life here in town?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, you've only been here 6 months. How is that working out for you?
It's been great.
Yeah.
I love it here.
Yeah.
It's really a dream job.
Yeah, there's so much to learn and so much to do. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Connecticut.
So you know the area pretty well, New England. You're back home. You were at Appalachian State. Were you in the archives there?
Yeah, I was the processing archivist there.
Okay, yeah. How long has Jones Library been in existence?
Jones Library was incorporated in 1919 after a bequest by Samuel Minot Jones, who's our founder.
Who was Mr. Jones?
He was a lumberman. He grew up in Amherst, and his family has strong Amherst connections. He's related to Eugene Field and the Field family, who also were in Amherst for a time. And then he went on to New York City, where he lived, and then maintained his connections with Amherst so that his will provided that if there were no heirs, that the money would come here to form a public library.
Thank God for all these bachelors. Forbes Library was the same. The guy was never married, had no descendants, and left all of his money to the library.
He was married.
Oh, he was married. Okay, but no descendants.
He had one son,
okay.
But Minot Jones was his son, and he died during World War I.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
A few years after Samuel Minot Jones, so the money had been kept in trust for him, and then there was no heir at that point, so then it transferred here.
Okay, that's good to get that clear. Was there a library here before the Jones Library?
There were. Both of the branches, the Munson Memorial and the North Amherst Library, were established well before the Jones was, and there was also a smaller town library that was in existence, and then they came sort of merged with the Jones once the Jones was established.
Has the archive been here as long as the library? Is it coeval?
Almost. The archives and special collections, particularly the local history and genealogy collections, have been around almost since 1919, since before we were actually in this building. The basis of the special collections is the Lucius Manlius Boltwood genealogy and local history collections, and they form the basis. So there, before the renovation, there were the Boltwood rooms where all the sort of local history and genealogy materials were kept.
What are the oldest things you have here? What are the oldest records, genealogical records that you have? The town is so old.
Our oldest materials, most of our oldest materials date back to the 17th and 18th century. We actually have a will from 1434 that's
Okay.
this French will that we found that's part of the Charles Green Rare Book and Binding Collection. And he has some of the oldest materials. There's some books from the 1600s that he had collected. He was our first director, and he had a strong interest in special collections.
I was going to ask you about him. I noticed on your website Charles Green was mentioned both with Emily Dickinson and Robert Frost as being a big collector of both. So he was the spark for building those special collections?
Yes, he's the reason we have such a vibrant and rich special collections department.
What about him? Can you tell us anything about him? What was his background? Do you know?
I don't know as much as I should yet because I'm still so new, but
Sure.
I know that he was really interested in libraries. He started, before he was here, he was at Mass Agricultural College, which became UMass, and he was librarian there, and then he was hired here in 1921, and he was the director here until 1956.
Wow, that's a long run.
So he had a very long tenure, and then he kept on as emeritus librarian and was basically the curator of special collections from then for several years after that.
Yeah. I noticed that he corresponded regularly with Robert Frost, asking him for information and copies of his books, and was very active in corresponding with Robert Frost.
Yes.
And must have been his friend.
Yes, they were friends, and Charles Green recognized really early on, before Robert Frost was really famous, how important he was as a poet.
Right, he might have just seemed like a local guy at the time and didn't know he was going to be worldwide famous.
And he really started the first collection of Robert Frost.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
And Robert Frost credits the Jones Library as really his first collector under the stewardship of Charles Green.
That's really interesting. Now, you're currently still collecting things. What are you trying to collect now? Do you, obviously, if anything of Emily Dickinson's comes up, you're going to be attending to that, and Robert Frost. What are you looking towards in the future collecting? Are there things that you want to collect about Amherst history that are going on now?
Yeah, we definitely are interested in current materials as well as historical materials with an eye of, this is going to be history someday. I'm really interested in diversifying our collections a little bit and bringing sort of the cultural and ethnic diversity that we have in town and make sure that's reflected in our collections. We have a very strong Amherst authors collection, and so it's important to me to continue to collect materials from current Amherst authors as well as ones that have lived here.
Well, the library's lucky to have somebody young like you to be looking forward towards what's coming. What is your relationship with the Historical Society? Do you work together? Do you collect together? Do you have different domains that you both try to emphasize?
We have a great relationship. I love everyone at the Historical Society. Marianne Curling is the curator there. And we have a great relationship and collaborate quite a bit. We've often said that we sort of have two parts of the whole of Amherst history, because we have the documents and the photographs and sort of paper materials here, and they have all the objects, artifacts, furniture, clothing, tools. So those materials are there, and they overlap extensively. So we'll have the letters, and they'll have the gown that somebody wore that really connects back together. And so we do work together a lot.
How about the Homestead? That's expanded so much over the last few years into a major museum. How do you work with them? Is there a coordination between Historical Society, you, and the Homestead, and how does that work out?
There is. The Emily Dickinson Homestead has been great in terms of collaboration. The Emily Dickinson International Society is meeting in Amherst in August. And so the Emily Dickinson Museum and I and the Society, or not I, but the Jones Library, is going to be co-sponsoring the musical event that's happening that'll be open to the public. So we do things like that. And then we also collaborate with, collection, because our collections overlap so much. And
where is the meeting going to be of this International Dickinson Society?
The board meeting is here at the Jones, and then most of the events are over at Amherst College.
Okay. How many people show up for something like that, do you think?
I don't know. I think at least a couple hundred.
That'll be interesting.
Yeah, they come from all over the world. I've heard it's pretty neat.
I remember when we lived here in Amherst, the tourists always amazed me that came, and I noticed quite a few Japanese tourists would come. And I always found like a kind of relationship between, say, haiku and Emily Dickinson, and I think the Japanese really appreciate her. I'm sure there'll be a big contingent visiting from there. Do a lot of visitors come here to the library? Do you get people coming up here just to touch and see and find out about Emily and Robert?
Yeah, we get a lot of visitors. We get probably 1,000 visitors a year.
Yeah.
Many of them come just to walk around the exhibits and see the exhibit space, or to come and look at specific.
And you
Dickinson
encourage that.
draws.
You encourage
Yes.
people coming. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and they come to see the different collections, or they're coming for serious research or genealogy research.
That's really great to hear, because Mass Center for the Book is really not just pursuing this initiative with public libraries, but trying to focus on the Connecticut River Valley as a book valley, both with the book arts, binders, printers, but also writers, illustrators, and the libraries are a huge component, as well as museums. And it's just great to have places like this where the public can come and visit as part of creating a book valley. So people, when they come, there's places to go, things to see. You have set aside some things for us to look at today, and I'm really excited to see things. I'm a big fan of both Emily Dickinson and Robert Frost, and I've never really been here to visit. So today's my big day, not just NCTVs and Mass Center for the Books. Let's go see what you got.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, Cyndi, you promised that you were going to show us some of your treasures. Here we are. What have you got?
So we have just a small selection of some treasures. To begin with, this is a photograph of Samuel Minot Jones, who is our founder. And I did say that the Historical Society has most of the objects, and we have most of the sort of more paper archives materials. But there are some exceptions, and so I brought out Samuel Minot Jones's Civil War sword.
Wow.
It's an Ames sword, which was made in Chicopee, which is kind of neat. And then this is Samuel Minot Jones's son's duck. It's a female wooded merganser, and he actually shot it himself. And had it, and so this is sort of the example of one of the most unusual things we have in our collection.
I think you'd make a nice mascot for the library, except I think you already have one. Is it an owl?
Yeah, we have an owl. Yeah, if only he was an owl.
Yeah.
But what can you do? And then I pulled out several things related to the Emily Dickinson collection we have. This is one of the few letters that we have that Emily Dickinson wrote. It's to her uncle Joseph Sweetser, that she wrote in 1858. And we have 4 of her manuscript poems, including We Play at Paste, which is a really special addition to our collection. And then we also have a pretty complete set of editions of her poems. So this is the first edition that was published in 1890, after her death, of course. But so we have a copy of that edition, which is pretty special. And then we also have what we call the Dickinson Reading Collection, which are copies of books that she would have read or were owned in her household.
That's really interesting. Now, did you have to go back and reconstitute this library, or are these books that you had, or did you have a reading list that you could go back and try to recreate? There
was a reading list of ones that we knew were in her house. There was actually a whole book written about, sort of the books that she read, and her father, Edward Dickinson, was, highly literate as a lawyer, and so these are not the actual copies that she owned, but they're the same edition of the book, so you can sort of get a sense of what she would have read. And this
What book is that?
This is Mitchell's Ancient Atlas, which would have been the geography book that she had when she attended Amherst Academy.
Are there still books that you're looking for?
It's a pretty complete set, and as far as I know, there aren't others that we're looking for to add.
How many books do you think you have from her library?
We have. I think there's definitely over 100, and probably closer to 200. It takes up like 2 shelf ranges.
I think that's really interesting. I see other libraries doing similar things, trying to reconstitute the library of the author. They did it with Edith Wharton over at the Mount. I think it's a really worthwhile pastime to really recreate their life and the books that influenced them, and especially with Emily Dickinson. She was so literate, and books played such a large part in her life.
Yeah, it's a really great collection, and we have similar collections where, like with Robert Francis, the poet, we have books that he actually owned, and so we sort of have his library, and they're his editions of ones that he owned.
Yeah.
In terms of context for Emily Dickinson's life, we have really rich collections that sort of showcase the different other parts of life. So this is one of the account books. It was the Cutler General Store account book, and it actually shows the purchases that were made by the Dickinson household and also her brother's Austin Dickinson's household. And so you can see that she's purchasing, brown sugar and flour to make all of her cakes and things that she was so well known for, and really get a sense of what was available in Amherst at the time.
Now, you laid to rest a little myth the last time I visited here about Emily Dickinson lowering poems to the children outside of her house. You said that might have been true, but she did lower cookies and cakes out her window.
Yes, I think she did lower poems, and in some cases she would attach notes with the cakes. And so we have one in our collection that refers to a cake that we think was attached as a gift, and so she wrote a little poem and also had cakes with it.
I wonder if there's an Emily Dickinson cookbook.
There is.
Okay.
When I was at the Homestead years and years ago, they had a little book that had her recipes that she was.
That would be really interesting to see.
Used.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out when I go over there.
And then the other one that sort of is provides some context to what was going on in Amherst during Emily's life. We have some items from Henry Jackson, who was this is his business card. He was one of the most prominent African Americans at the time, and he lists his occupation here as truckman, but he was also known as a teamster. And so we have those items, and then this is one of his photograph albums, which is one of the most beautiful albums.
That is
I've
the most
ever seen.
elaborate binding I think I've ever seen.
Yeah, and so it has all these great images of his family and members of the community.
Could you hold that up just a little bit at an angle? Yeah.
And so it's just a really neat treasure. You can see, what people wore and how they were.
Could you turn it sideways so we can get that at the right angle? Yeah, there we go. That is a real showpiece, yeah, to show Black lives at that time.
Yeah, and we don't have enough about, the collected for African Americans in Amherst, but that's at least one that we do.
Yeah, that's really great. I never know about that. I think our viewers will be happy to see that.
And then we have editions of Emily Dickinson poetry, including whenever it's been translated to other languages. So this one has been translated. It's a complete set of her poems translated into Japanese. And then this one is an example of her poems being translated into Greek, which is kind of neat. And certainly presents some challenges for our catalogers to sort of create records.
Wouldn't Emily
for them.
be surprised at how famous she became? She had so little recognition in her own life.
Yeah. And then, so we have Emily Dickinson, and then, of course, Robert Frost. And we have a really rich Robert Frost collection. Like Emily Dickinson, we have Frost editions. This is one example that he inscribed to the Jones Library. So it says, "To the Jones Library from an old friend, Robert Frost," when he was in Amherst. And he signed several to the Jones Library, to Charles Green. And then we have other copies.
He was kind of stingy with his signatures. I always heard the story that if somebody came up and asked for him to autograph a book, he'd say one of two things. If you can recite one of my poems, I'll sign it, or give me $1. He was a tough customer in some ways.
And then we have a lot of his original manuscripts, which is a really neat aspect to the collection. This is one of his manuscript books that we have. This is for A Further Range,
amazing. Yeah.
which won the Pulitzer Prize in 1937. And so it's like a complete handwritten copy of how the book was published. And most of them the poems appear in their final versions, but there are, a few different minor revisions that have been made.
I love his handwriting. It's
Yes.
just beautiful.
Yeah.
Now, do you have scholars coming to study this manuscript? Or
We get scholars studying sort of all aspects of the Frost collection. Lately, they've been very interested in his letters, because there's a project to publish a complete set of his letters.
So you said they're publishing his letters. Who is the publisher?
Belknap and Harvard.
That's a natural. They must have a large collection of his items, too. They have everything.
Yeah.
It's Harvard.
So this is the first volume that was published, I believe, last year, with his letters. So it's the first set from 1886 to 1920. And so our letters from that he wrote as a young man to Sabra Peabody when he was, I think, 11 or 12, are in this book.
That is amazing. That is really, really cool.
So this is one of my favorite of Robert Frost manuscripts that we have in our collections. It's the draft of Stopping by Woods, and it shows the revisions that he made to it, which is really neat to sort of
Probably
trace.
his most famous poem.
Yes. And we have school kids who come in every year, and they have a little project where they sit in our exhibit room and they discuss, why he made such changes to it, which is really
That's really important, yeah.
and then connected with the Robert Frost collection, we have this amazing collection of woodcuts from J.J. Lanke's. And so most of the illustrations that appeared in Frost's books were woodcuts by Lanke's. This is the original woodblock for Calf Pasture Gate.
This is a really special collection. I had no idea you had these.
Yeah, we have several woodcuts, and then many of the prints from the woodcuts.
Was Robert Frost friends with this artist?
He was. Lanke's met Frost at a poetry reading, and they became friends. They lived fairly nearby. This is the print from that woodblock, and it's actually a view on Robert Frost's farm.
Just beautiful. Oh my God, that is so simple, but just perfect for this area, for this part of the country.
Yeah, many of the Christmas cards that Robert Frost would send out were illustrated with woodcuts by Lanke's. There, and then we have a great collection of Robert Francis materials. Robert Francis was called by Robert Frost the best neglected poet. And Francis has a really strong connection with the Jones Library. He helped design an early herb garden, and then he would use one of the study rooms that they had in the early days to do a lot of his writing, and did a lot of poetry readings and things here. So we have a great collection of his editions. This is his autobiography that he signed.
And he was a friend of the Jones as well. Like Robert Frost was a friend of the library.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, very much so. And then this is one of his manuscript poems that appears in his papers. This one is Sheep.
very beautiful handwriting as well.
Yeah. So we have that. One of the other really great collections we have is the Clifton Johnson collection. He was a writer and illustrator and photographer who lived in Hadley. And his first book that he published was The New England Country, and he had done lots of illustrations for other books and photographs before that. But this is one that he did himself, and he actually designed the cover piece for it too, and then provided all of the photographs and illustrations that are in that. And he traveled all across the country doing his Highways and Byways of America series, where so there's Highways and Byways of New England, and then in 1901 and 1902 he went throughout the South and did Highways and Byways of the South, and he visited the Tuskegee Institute, and so this is a photograph of Booker T. Washington with his son David picking strawberries.
Oh my goodness,
and,
that is just great, and that's his photograph.
That's his photograph, and he also met George Washington Carver and took other photographs of the area, and then he would travel around to all areas of the South and then throughout the country. And he was really interested in sort of the rural people's experience, so very much more the byways than the highways.
And he made his living as an author.
As an author and an illustrator.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he started out more as an illustrator, and then also wrote numerous books, over 100 books. And then this is one of his illustrations. He did a lot of pen and ink drawings that are just delightful. This one is from the Land of Heathers. It appeared in that book, and he traveled to England, Ireland, and Scotland in 1896 to do photography and then illustrations for some books. And he combined it, he was very shrewd, and combined it with his honeymoon. So they honeymooned, and he got some business done, at the same time.
How New England, how Yankee.
Yeah. And he started out, he taught for a year at the Hockenham Schoolhouse, and his wife actually taught there before they were married. So he had a very strong interest in education and things. And so he had a large school book collection that he donated to the Jones here. And so there's lots of 19th century and 18th century school books as examples from that. And so this one is Asa Gray's How Plants Grow.
This is a great window into society at that time, the school books. I mean, it was kind of neglected that, you'd have your school book and get rid of it. That somebody collected them is just great. Yeah,
he has a great collection, and there's all these science textbooks and philosophy, a lot of deportment books, so how you're supposed to behave and act and things.
That was a real New England specialty, I think. I ran into that at the Fords too. These very Victorian stories for children on how to treat their parents and how to be good students and not lazy and all the rest. So
yes,
definitely a New England trait.
And then going along with sort of our Amherst authors collection, we have some materials, especially early editions of the books of Charles Eastman. So this is a photograph by Frank Waugh of Charles Eastman, who lived in Amherst. He moved here in, I think, 1902 or 1903, and he lived here for about a dozen years. And most of his books he did a lot of his writing during that period.
Was he Native American?
He was a Native American, and he became a doctor, and then came back to New England and did a lot of writing.
Interesting. I'm finding out so many things I didn't know about today.
But so this is one of his books. He was one of the first Native Americans to write about Native Americans' experience from a Native perspective, and so this is one of his books, and he signed it there.
It's a really special thing. Do you have anything of Helen Hunt Jackson's? She was.
We do.
quite
I
the-
didn't bring anything out, but we do have several of her books and some of her manuscript materials.
She really was a mover and shaker for helping the Native Americans of this country. And I think she was the first secretary of Bureau of Indian Affairs, I guess they called it, and so that's quite an accomplishment for her.
Yeah, and then Charles Eastman's wife, Elaine Goodale Eastman, was also involved with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and she was a writer too, and they wrote several things together like this one, and this one is signed by her, made out to her friend.
It'd be interesting to put Helen Hunt Jackson in context with these other people. There must have been a group that was interested in this area, maybe along with the people that were interested in, anti-slavery movements. Maybe they then became aware of problems with Native Americans as well.
And then the last items that I pulled are both from the Julius Lester collection.
Yes.
And showcase that we're still sort of collecting things today. We're so fortunate to have his papers here. We have a complete set of the books that he wrote. He's written over 40 books, picture books and books for young adults and memoirs. And this is the first book he wrote. It was co-written with Pete Seeger, and it's a folk singer's guide to the 12-string guitar, and it includes the records that were featured, so you could listen to the music as well. And Julius Lester has a lot of music in his collection, and then we have his correspondence and journals and photographs, and it's an extremely rich collection. He is a wonderfully interesting man. He's done so much. And he worked with civil rights. He was a professor at UMass for many, many years, and did.
What have you got there in your hands?
Right. So this is his first journal from 1956-57, and he journaled a lot. And this is an example of the first one we have when he was a very young man.
Now, looking at the fragility of that paper, you as an archivist, you must have climate control, humidity controls, all kinds of things going on to preserve these documents.
We do. We put everything in acid-free folders and boxes, and then we have climate control to control the temperature and humidity, and then provide security to the collections.
Are you trying to digitize any of these documents, or are you?
We do. We have a site where a lot of our materials, particularly our photographs, have been digitized. It's digitalamherst.org. And so a lot of the Clifton Johnson materials and our early photographers, like Lincoln Barnes and John Lovell, are on there, and we're adding to that other materials.
Can people access that through the Jones Library website?
Yes, if they go to the Jones Library website and then Special Collections, there's a link to it there, or you can go directly to digitalamherst.org and get in.
Well, Cyndi, you've given us a great tour. We've seen a lot of treasures. I think the viewers are really going to be thrilled to see these things that maybe, like me, they didn't know existed. And I've got to say that I think that this treasure house and this archive is in very good hands with somebody who is as forward-looking as you are.
Well, thank you very much.